Would anyone like to make a statement, or may I start here? I'll come to you. Yeah, please.
Thank you. So thank you for everything you've both said. And you mentioned that Iran has brought the uranium enrichment up to weapons grade levels. What do you think is the best and most practical Israeli way to address that, whether on its own or together with other countries?
I mean, I think that there are two things that can happen, and they're not mutually exclusive. One is that the regime can fall, and the other is that Israel, in conjunction with other states, perhaps in the region, perhaps with other outside powers, or on its own, can use military force to set back Iran's nuclear capability sufficiently to enable the Iranian people to overthrow the regime. So I think that the real key here is overthrowing the regime. I think that if the regime is allowed to become a nuclear weapons possessing state, that the likelihood of its overthrow is minimized. And I think that at that point we're looking at a completely different Middle East, because I think that our peaceful relations with Egypt, with Jordan, with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, etc., would dissipate. I think all of the formal agreements would disintegrate, and the informal alliance structure that we've built with the Gulf state would dissipate out of fear, out of terror. And so I think that it's imperative that they not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. I think our best allies in that right now are the Iranian people who are seeking the overthrow of the regime. So I think that you'd have to have a combination of force and active support through all possible means of the Iranian people. That's what I think.
Trump did provide the bunker busting plane, didn't he?
They haven't. They're not supposed to arrive until it's no longer useful.
Yeah. Can we go these two gentlemen and then back to you? Sorry, and then at the back, please.
So as a diaspora Jew, all of us here are.
Not quite. I'm representing my wife now. I'm reveling in my minority status.
So I guess it was a question or a statement, but there's not much as diaspora Jews can really weigh in on this. But what my concern is I see leadership that has always been supportive of Israel, and take out J Street, take out the Israel Fund, take those out. But other thought leaders who are in the center or maybe slightly center left are being hypercritical about Israel, about the reform that are taking place now. And that is of concern to me because it means others take cover. And I mean, people like Erwin Cutler in our own country, who's written twice about it now, which surprised me, and even more so, Alan Dershowitz. So, I mean, I don't know how you react to that, but that's to me, as I say, living Chutz Haaretz, being very, very concerning. And they don't understand, I think, British parliamentary democracy, or they'd understand that this is not anti-democratic, but that's for another day. But
yeah, I'm disappointed with Erwin, and I had Dershowitz on my show, on the Caroline Glick show. It's my podcast, debating Professor Avi Bell on judicial reform. I mean, his arguments, not surprisingly, don't compel me, but I think there are a lot of things that go into both of those men's positions, not many of which I don't believe are based on interpretation of law. I think, the best thing that in an ideal world one would expect for diaspora Jews to say, look, this is just as one would expect from the American government to say, this is an Israeli political issue. We're ill-equipped to render judgment on it, and it's not our place. And therefore, let's allow the Israeli people to decide their course on this issue as seems most proper in their eyes. That, of course, is not what happened. And Yair Lapid actually, again, acting, Simcha Rotman, the head of the Knesset Constitution, Law and Justice Committee, accused him yesterday, I think properly, from the podium in the Knesset. He accused him of leading the BDS movement against Israel, which is what he's doing. He's calling for a boycott and a collapse of the Israeli economy. This is something unprecedented.
Alan's not unreasonable on this, is
Yeah, he is.
He's opposed to the reforms?
Yeah.
I'm astounded.
We have,
Sure.
kind of sense that you might want to read the letter from.
Speak up, please, a little bit.
Sorry, MP Yara Sachs put out a letter saying,
Who?
Yaira Sachs, she's a
Member of the Canadian Parliament.
member of Parliament, Jewish, Israeli.
In Toronto?
Yes, based here. And you should read her letter because I think it speaks to the problem that was just raised of where diaspora Jews should sit. Now, she claims she's got an Israeli background, but nonetheless, she's a diaspora Jew at the time. And she said, well, we have no place to have any comments, but I'm going to go and tell you that these reforms are terrible. And I think it goes to the question raised of how we're contributing as diaspora Jews
Well, I mean, not surprisingly, the most outspoken leaders of the diaspora Jewish community are playing a very bad role in this, because the majority of American Jews are on the left, and if they were the ones who decided the outcome of Israel's elections, then Meretz would form the next government, and they didn't get elected in the last elections at all. They were wiped out, and Labor was almost wiped out, but the American Jews support people who are a very small minority in Israeli politics, so it's not surprised that they would be taking these positions. It's irresponsible, and it's unfair. It's solicited by Yair Lapid. And so, I would be very happy, for instance, if prominent Jews in places like Toronto were to put out a letter saying that there's nothing anti-democratic about the program that's being ushered through the Knesset at all, and every democracy requires checks and balances on all three branches of government. How Israel wants to organize those checks and balances is its decision, and that's something for the politicians in the Knesset to figure out in a democratic process. But to claim that the effort to place limits on the Supreme Court's powers, the concept that that's anti-democratic or fascist is insane. And I think that would be a very helpful thing to do, to just sort of, let's, as they say, let's get real about this, right? Let's tell the truth that you might hate these reforms. That's fine, but let's accept and acknowledge the fact that the Israeli people spoke on November 1st, and that their demonstration, that is the act of voting, was far more powerful than any 100,000 people who try to storm the Knesset, and that their will has to be respected. I think that would be a reasonable position to put out, regardless of the eventual outcome of the legislative process, that you have to recognize the legitimacy of that process in a democracy.
Did you have a question? But my proposal is, can we hear from this man, then you? I'm sorry to point, but just, and then the lady, and then the gentleman by the window. I want everyone to get a chance here, so we'd better speed things up a little
I'm
bit.
sorry, I'll reduce my answers to 15 minutes at least.
Sir.
Thank you very much. I found your words very enlightening and heartwarming. I have one question though, very simple, and maybe I'm missing something. Where was judicial reform? It seems to be the talk of the day, and where was it 10 to 12 years ago while Benjamin Netanyahu was in office? How come it didn't raise its head then? How come and people are putting the two together in a way and saying this new amalgamation between the right wing and Likud is resulting in this. And I just want to understand that. Also, the other thing is, I'm going to ask you a favor, and I don't know if you can pen a little letter, I would certainly put it together, because I find your words going to be a little better than mine.
No, I don't know about that. You seem well spoken here. So just the answer to the first question is because you didn't have 61 votes in the Knesset in favor of it. So when Bibi was elected in 2015, for instance, he had, I think, a 63-seat government. But 10 of those seats belonged to Moshe Kahlon's Kulanu party, and they supported the status quo on the judiciary for many reasons, among others. Kahlon himself was being extorted by the Attorney General because they had an open investigation against his brother that they refused to close. So he was under the gun. But you had, as a result of Kahlon's allegiance to the judicial fraternity, you couldn't get legal reform. So this is the first time that you've gotten it. And the reason that you've gotten it sort of speaks to your second question. It's not about the makeup of the coalition. I mean, what they're really saying is that it's Bibi wants to do this to get out of his case. In a way, the case is the best thing going for Netanyahu because, as Conrad, you said, the prosecution has fallen apart since the trial began. So this is not true. But the way that Netanyahu was railroaded by the state prosecution, I think, sent them is the reason we have a majority of 64 seats as opposed to 53 or 55 or 59 votes in favor of judicial reform. It's because the massive Likud voters who hadn't perhaps understood the problem recognized the depth of the problem by the ouster of the prime minister and what effectively was a coup of lawyers.
Yeah, so I'd like to clarify something. I resonate with what you said before about the fragile nature of Israel. It's very, very fragile. But when I look at massive changes throughout our society and our history, everything from when I was born in 1960, almost no cars had seatbelts, then suddenly almost overnight everyone does. Banning smoking. When we all grew up, we knew with 100% certainty about all else that we knew that there are only two genders, male and female. And now, it only very recently we've cottoned on to, now if you're the head of psychiatry of autistic children and you say that a boy who says he's a girl isn't a girl, you're fired on the spot. So my point is this. Even though it's fraught with incredible risk and danger, why do you think that someone like Netanyahu, with the uber majority that he has and the support of all the people, to stand up and state the following reality? Those on the left are neo-Marxists.
Can I interrupt you? I understand what you're saying. Can I just interrupt you so that other people can get the chance? I think that the answer is this. You're right. Everything seems impossible until it seems inevitable. And that's true. That's how revolutionary change occurs in our world. But I think that what makes it inevitable would not be a speech like that, a de Gaulle-style speech by Netanyahu.
Not a speech taking action.
No, I don't think that you can do that. I think what will make it inevitable is when we pass the first tranche of reforms. I think what makes it inevitable is that the president of Israel has taken a stand regarding the necessity for judicial reform and the placement of limitations on judicial powers. I think that once we pass this first tranche of reforms, it does matter what form they take, what laws are actually passed. But I think that there's a lot of room for flexibility in the laws in this tranche of reforms, because once this tranche of reforms passes, then you're going to have resignation by the left to the inevitability of limiting the powers of the legal fraternity. Don't forget, there are another 5 stages to this process. All aspects of the legal system are now going to be reformed once this happens. But none of this can happen until you have widespread acceptance and or resignation to the fact, after the fact, that there will be limits placed on judicial authority in Israel. So I think that is the most important thing when you have Cheshin and others stating that the Supreme Court is going to overturn the laws, or that they're going to overturn the basic law, Israel is a nation state of the Jewish people, or they want to oust Netanyahu from power, they want to oust Ben Gvir from power. all of these things happening. Until you pass this reform, they're going to be able to say that, and they're going to be able to do that. They already did it to dairy. So I think that that's when it becomes inevitable, is when these reforms are passed. Again, in almost any way, if you remember, Chaim Weizmann had this statement where he said, in the Peel Commission in 1937, said, I would accept Israel if they made it this, if they would agree to Israel the size of a tablecloth, I would agree to it. The problem is they won't accept the principle that Israel has a right to exist in any size. So I think the same adheres here. If they accept the concept of limits on judicial power, then everything becomes possible. So long as they don't, nothing is possible, including arresting people or a Saturday Night Massacre type thing. It won't hold.
Yeah, there was a.
Allow me for one moment before we continue on. I don't want to interrupt this process of asking questions, and everyone will have their opportunity. But as clearly some people want to leave, I'd like to just do two things. Number one, I would like to thank everybody who came and thank Caroline and Lord Conrad. And I would also like to point out something that is extremely critical in this discussion, and that is that we have mentioned a lot of things. They have mentioned a lot of things in the course of this discussion. One of the things that got mentioned is, of course, the New Israel Fund that is critical in pushing these reforms and pushing this undermining of the Jewish state in many, many ways. And talking about what we're against is not the solution. Talking about what we're for is the solution. And one of the things that we must all be very aware of is an organization in Israel, I have no connection to it all, called the Israel Independence Fund. The Israel Independence Fund has spawned, they're an incubator for organizations, Regavim, Adkan, Shomrim, all kinds of organizations that you'll be familiar with. The Israel Independence Fund maintains a very low profile and funds and spawns these organizations. Yes, we hear about the New Israel Fund because they have huge amounts of money. The Israel Independence Fund does not have enough money, and it would be a very worthwhile thing to look them up on the web and help them. Donate in some ways you can, and be a part of the positive aspect of this. I'm going to do one other small thing that I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I'm going to point out that Caroline has come out and given us incredible information, shared her time with us in a wonderful, wonderful way, and Caroline is also worthy of support. And anybody who wants to support Caroline is please welcome to do that. And I hope I'm not embarrassing you. I apologize.
A little bit, but okay.
but it's very important to be for what we're for, not against what we're against. Being against something that doesn't get us anywhere. Let us be for what we're for. And on this note, I open the table up to more questions.
My suggestion at this stage is that those who've identified themselves put their comments or questions one after the other, and then Caroline try a roundup of everybody.
Okay.
And then, I mean, I understand we're getting close to 2:00, so some people have to move on. Was there a question here, and then the lady and the gentleman by the window? Was there somebody here, or am I imagining that? Madam, would you?
I'd like to bring things back to what we can do here in Canada, because it's all nice to talk about what's going on in Israel. I'm not an Israeli citizen. I would like to be one day, and hopefully one day I will be. But I'm speaking, taking the privilege away from Anita, I'm speaking as a member of the board of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, and I'm speaking as a rabbi's daughter and a rabbi's wife. I'm not a lawyer, I don't know anything legal. I have, for the last couple of months, immersed myself in trying to understand what's going on in Israel. What bothered me the most, and I'll say it in public, recorded, were the prominent rabbis here in Toronto who went and demonstrated against Israel outside the embassy with a mob of the New Israel Fund people. These were people who I have respected in the past. They've lost my respect. They don't understand the concept of ma'arit ayin. Ma'arit ayin means there's certain things you don't do because it doesn't look good. For instance, I wouldn't go to McDonald's even for a coffee because somebody will say, oh, I saw Judith eating in McDonald's. It doesn't look right. So The average person in Canada, the non-even Jews, when they see rabbis protesting against Israel, they don't understand they're protesting against some judicial reform. All they see is, aha, the rabbis in Toronto don't like Israel, so why should I like Israel? I'm going to protest against Israel too. And I don't know how to deal with it. I just don't know what to do.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, sir.
I just wanted to make one quick comment. First of all, Caroline, I hear my 7 a.m. Saturday morning, Shabbat morning reading every week, which I really, really enjoy. I'm a little bit less black-pilled than you. I think that over time, demographics is going to help this problem, and the whole state of Israel is being changed. Haredim, the numbers are growing. National camp, people are having 5 or 6 kids per family. Don't you think over the next 20 or 30 years, as the numbers change, this is really like the last attempt by the left to try to hold back the obvious change to the state of Israel in terms of demographics and political power? And just one more comment to what you said. If we recall back to the Oslo Accords, did we see anyone on the right, any one Jewish leader on the right that was against Oslo, protesting against Israel, coming out against? The Jewish community was completely silent.
Yeah.
Even those who were totally against it and thought it was the worst thing, and it was going to lead to complete, as some of
Who
my
knew it?
friends
Who knew
who knew there was going to absolutely blow up. No one screamed, no one protested, no one said a word. I just wanted to respond to you.
That's the difference between conservatives and liberals.
Can I just, I want to say two things. On that Oslo business, I editorialized about it in the Jerusalem Post and in the Daily Telegraph in London. And my view was it was a preposterous agreement that had no chance. But once the Israeli government had signed on to it, it had to be ratified. I didn't feel that the government of Israel could be revoked in Israel, although I didn't think it was a good agreement. But I also want to ask you something. Do I understand correctly that our Charter of Rights, which is essentially it was a political wheeze of Pierre Trudeau's, it doesn't actually have a great deal of authority, considering that the parties can, exempt themselves because civil rights is a provincial jurisdiction. Do I understand that it is taken seriously and quoted respectfully in Israel, and in some of our jurists, Antonio Lamar and others, are cited somehow in support of the Barak position of this judistocracy, or whatever you call it? Is this the case? I just put that to you. So can you?
Yeah, and then there was just.
Sorry, please. I just didn't.
My question was a little bit like what the gentleman before me addressed, that I also, my concern with what's happening on the left, and maybe that also kind of addresses what you said, is that they are not maybe so anti-Jewish, as this is their last clinging to power, as they're losing. I think they lost politically because of Palestinian intransigence and inability to have a partner for peace. And then they're losing now demographically because demographic trends are not in their favor. So that's why they're clinging to whatever they can hold on to, because
Well, I mean, I think so. I'll start with you, Conrad. I mean, yes. Without my others can answer this better than I can, because I don't read their gobbledygook about the legal basis of their extra legal decisions. But yeah, I mean, they'll quote anybody as authoritative from the outside, and unless they oppose them, like you won't hear Aaron Barak quoting Richard Posner or Antonin Scalia or Robert Bork, who all said that he was a mafia boss, and that they destroyed Israel's rule of law, et cetera, and he was a dictator. So they won't quote any of those jurists. But of course, any Tom, Dick, and Harry in Canada or in Finland or in Outer Mongolia who agrees with their judicial philosophy is automatically a philosopher king in their view. And of course, their positions are binding, right? So yes, I mean, you see that. In terms of Marit Ain, I think you have to ask yourself a different question. Whose perception matters to them. Because I don't think that they're thinking as Jews when they protest against Israel. They're thinking rather as progressives. So that they're using, I mean, I call them as a Jew Jews. As a Jew, I'm embarrassed of Israel. You know, as a Jew, I oppose this Israeli action. It's always as a Jew, but the Jew for them is an accessory to a progressive political identity. So I think that's the problem that Jews in Canada, in the United States, and in other Western democracies are facing, which is that you do things not as a progressive or as a conservative for that matter, but as a Jew. And so when you have progressives who happen to be Jewish using their Judaism to the accident of their birth as a whip to beat the Jewish state, then you have a significant issue. I think that the way to handle that challenge, which I would argue is the most significant challenge that diaspora Jewry faces as they move towards an uncertain future with the rise of anti-Semitism in mainstream circles in their governments and in their societies, is that first of all, you have to be good to your friends and bad to your enemies. I mean, that's my first rule in all things, in personal relations and in politics, because then people will want to be your friends and they won't want to be your enemies. So I think that you have to make coalitions with people who are on your side. And I think that you have to be willing to disengage from the people who aren't, even when they happen to have the title rabbi before their name. So I think that really is the challenge of the Jewish communities of the diaspora today. I think it's also Israel's challenge. I think that the challenge of consuls general from Israel in the large metropolitan centers in the Western world is to empower the Jews who aren't as a Jews, and to give them voice and to facilitate their work on behalf of their Jewish communities in the diaspora, and also to expand and protect their ties to the Jewish state. So I think that that's a very important question. But again, when you look at the way that people act, everybody is always acting with a view towards somebody watching them, you know, especially now when everybody seems to think that their life is reality television set, right? I mean, everything has to go up on Instagram. It's sort of pathological. I think there's no sense of privacy any longer. But who is your audience? Who are the target audiences for this Marit Ayin? And regarding the last gasp of the left, I mean, it's like, what was that we learned in intro to economics in freshman year in college? There's a Keynesian economics, and he said, in the long run, we're all dead. You know, I mean, right now, you know, unfortunately, we live in the short term. In fact, you know, we live in this world of instant gratification and Google searches that poses knowledge, right? So it's not even in the long term, it's in the next 5 seconds, because everybody on planet Earth has ADHD and they can't keep anything in their mind for longer than 30 seconds. So, you know, when you talk about the last gasp of something, when they're trying to bring you down in their last gasp, you still have to stand your ground, right? And so, you know, you always have to be recognizing the challenges of the moment, but keeping your eye on what's on the path, what's on the hill beyond, you know, and where is it that you're trying to reach, how to get there. You know, I mean, if I'm going to mix as many metaphors as I want to, then I'm going to say that there's more than one way to skin a cat, you know, and you have to be able to look at this again, going back to your question, right? What is that moment? What is the Saturday Night Massacre in this case? And you see, it didn't work out very well for Nixon, right? He lost.
It worked out very well for Reagan.
It worked out terribly for Nixon. And I would say that if you're going to be using a historical analogy, you can't say that it's 1981 and Reagan with the PATCO workers. It's Nixon with the deputy head of the FBI, you know, trying to criminalize his behavior and oust him from office.
How can you defeat an enemy if you don't name it?
You have to
can't.
move on. We're looking at the hill beyond. We're saying we want to get to the point where the Attorney General is subordinate to the government, where the government has the power to appoint deputies, director generals, and all other senior bureaucrats that have policymaking positions in government. We want to clean out the stables in every government ministry, and we want to actually vest elected leaders with the power to develop and implement the policies based on not only their convictions, but also on their pledges to voters. We want accountable government that is accountable to the people, not to the permanent bureaucracy. These are the things that we want. How do we get there? So again, I think that we're at a precipice. Believe you me, what's your name again?
Richard Hoffman.
Richard, I'm a polemicist. Do you think I would like anything more than to see somebody get up and do that? I mean, it's only what I've been advocating for the past 25 years. I mean, that would make me so happy. I mean, Yariv Levine was at the Yediot Achronot conference yesterday, and he told them off, it's like pornography. I mean, I can watch this clip. I've watched it like 50 times and I'm traveling. I mean, it's the best thing ever to watch them tell these people off. Yes. It's fantastic. But but that you have to, when you're in government, particularly in the case today where Israel's politicians are so weak in comparison to the court, the media, the permanent bureaucracy, that you have to be very careful. You have to use your ammunition sparingly and always be hitting it at targets that matter and always be hitting it at targets that will then propel you forward. So I think that the idea here is to make maximum use of what the president has offered in order to get to the next hill. Because again, when you have a critical mass of leftist politicians sitting in the Knesset, we don't have it, we're not anywhere close. And I'll leave with this parting thing. You can't get to the next hill. Yesterday or the Sunday, there was a member of Knesset from Yesh Atid, I don't remember his name. It doesn't matter because Yair Lapid picks them all. They don't actually have it. They're only accountable to him. They don't have primaries. And so one of the nameless Yesh Atid politicians had a motorcycle accident. And he was out, unbeknownst to me, and I didn't really care. I'm glad he's not dead, for a couple of weeks. And he came back on Sunday. And so there was this video of him returning to the Knesset. He has a neck brace and all that. And Bibi comes over to him and welcomes him back to the Knesset. And you see, and this is, like they're all manning the barricades outside. They're all calling for civil war outside. And all this is just a very human moment when Netanyahu comes over to this Yesh Atid lawmaker and he welcomes him back. And the guy is surrounded by other Yesh Atid members of Knesset. And they're all, and the picture was beautiful. They're all looking with hero worship at Netanyahu. Like they all admire him. All of these people who say that he's a dictator and a fascist and a criminal and corrupt and God only and Christ killer. I don't know. Anyway, all of the things that they're accusing him of, they all like secretly admire him, and the face of the admiration was captured in this photograph, which became viral. And Mayor Cohen is a former minister from the last government, the Naftali Bennett, the Yair Lapid government. And I think he was a social welfare minister or something. So he was one of the people drooling at Netanyahu in this picture. And, or ogling at him. Anyway, so the next morning he's interviewed on one of the propaganda stations. And it was very funny because for 11 minutes, all they wanted to talk about with him is to attack him for smiling at Bibi, okay? Now this is, I'm not joking, 11 minutes. All they can do, and they're screaming at him. First it's the anchor, and then it's the political reporter, and then it's the legal, and they're just screaming at this guy. How dare you smile at Bibi? And I think it's a very encouraging sign because they're in panic. Because at the end of the day, being a member of Knesset means something, right? You're there. You're dealing with people. You know that it's all bull. You know, it's all baloney, right? And the president already put down a stake and said this is legitimate, all right? So this too, God willing, shall pass, and we'll move on to the further goal, and we'll get past that one, and then you will see, without a Saturday Night Massacre, without screaming and yelling, things are moving in our direction. We have to let these processes play out, and the inertial force is already on our side. So I am supremely hopeful. It is really ugly, and it's scary because dying elites are still there, and they want to pull us all down with them. But I think I'm heartened by this moment. I was so happy on Sunday when they passed in the first reading. It was what does Winston Churchill say? This isn't the beginning of the end, but it's the end of the beginning. So that's where we are.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.